guys, everybody knows BMWs tend to leak. That's one of their bad reputations. Unfortunately, it is largely due to the excessive amounts of plastic that they use in these cars today. So if you saw my last video, you know I was doing a bit of a walk around how to look for problem areas in your car, because you want to keep the car as reliable as possible. You want to get ahead of these things. But actually, while I was filming that video, I actually stumbled across a leak. Go figure. I've got a 335 here with an N54 engine, and I found a little bit of an antifreeze leak, and it looks like it might be a hose or something, but we're going to investigate further. I'm actually going to take the car to my mechanic here now, Ed, greatest mechanic here in Edmonton area for sure, who loves and works on all these great import cars. But I'm going to take it to Ed. We're going to have a look around and see if we can find out what it is, and if we can, we're going to walk through the actual repair process on this. I'm going to actually replace the part, because I actually bought the part thinking or assuming it is what I thought it was. So if it is the case, we're going to change that part out. So you definitely want to watch. Let's go, guys. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Mark with Exotic Car Place, and today, okay guys, so we're leaving Ed's place now, and I'm really going to summarize what we end up finding. We did actually do some digging, and there in fact was an antifreeze leak, or coolant leak if you will, in my 335. So we did some poking around, and we found some obvious signs of old and fresh antifreeze, and it was on the driver's side of the engine compartment, front driver's side. Now there's a lot of rumors that there are different leaks typically found in different spots. I mean, there's a lot of different hoses and fittings, plus you've got the water pump and all these other kind of interesting parts. But honestly, as we started to dig in, we noticed we had to start taking some things apart to really expose where these leaks were coming from. So we ended up spending some time digging, taking things off, and while we were in there, we actually decided to do some other much bigger scope items, and I'm really going to share with you that in the next video, so make sure you catch that. But for today's purpose, I'm going to walk you through kind of what we found. So we stopped the car, we turned it off. There wasn't a lot of leak. We had a little bit of splatter on the front of the left side of the engine, and of course there was some fresh splatter and some of the old white sprinkled powder all over, obviously remnants of older antifreeze leaks. So there was a bunch of different signs that were things going on. So we started tearing into it. We actually took the pipe off that goes to the filter housing, which of course I don't have the filter housing anymore. I have the cone filters, but that pipe still exists. So we had to take that filter off. We had to take that inlet piping off, and the flange that connects up to that just above the radiator. There's a flange. You have to undo some bolts there. Actually, you have to take 2 bolts and 2 of those pop type rivets, the plastic rivets that BMW utilizes in a lot of their cars. So we had to disassemble that stuff. Then as we started digging, we noticed it was pretty obvious that the leaks were coming from an area right at the oil filter housing end of the top rad hose. So it was the top radiator hose that looks like was starting to leak on that one end, not on the radiator end, but on the other end of it. Now, I assumed that that was the case because I did some pre-checks beforehand, and I went out and bought that hose, and that hose ended up costing me about $82 Canadian to buy. And I know you can buy those hoses all over online, and probably Amazon and all these. There's different brands. I got the Gates brand. That cost me 82 bucks Canadian for that hose. And I didn't know definitively that was the issue, but doing some preliminary sniffing around, as per my last video, I felt that it looked like it was the hose or something like that. So anyway, what we ended up doing was we ended up undoing all the hose clamps, pulled all the pins out on the different points. So at the oil filter housing, we ended up pulling that fitting out, and we also undid the little fitting. So there's a little drain fitting or a little vent right at the radiator end, so we had to pull the cut the clip there and pull that hose right off. And then we also had to undo, there's another a slightly larger fitting that's also down at the bottom there too on the radiator end. We had to basically take that apart. That one has the pop snaps on it, so you basically snap that out and yank that. But then we had a bit of a problem at the radiator side. So at the radiator end, we basically had a seizure. So the upper rad hose has a plastic end on it with sort of a snap fitting, and we undid the snap fitting, but the hose wouldn't come loose. Now the hose, you got to be careful when you're taking that hose off. You don't want to snap it and twist it because there's teeth. There's sort of splines, if you will. There's a top one and a bottom one. One's thicker, one's smaller. But if you twist it, you might risk breaking the neck of the radiator off, and then you're up the creek. So fortunately, my mechanic, Ed, the best mechanic in Edmonton, I might add, knew this ahead of time, and so he advised us not to start twisting it. So we had to try to pull it apart. But the problem was, pulling it, it was seized. It was jammed. So we ended up having to take the Dremel out, and very, very carefully, with air tools or an air Dremel of sorts, we ended up cutting a line along the length of the housing. Had to keep cutting deeper and deeper. And then we ended up cutting the fitting right off of the hose and separated the two. That didn't help. We were having a real bugger of a time getting that disconnected from the radiator, but we had to be very careful because I did not want to risk damaging the rad. Otherwise, I'm going to be spending another $500, maybe $1,000 for a new radiator for the car. So I avoided that altogether. We picked away at it very carefully. We notched it, and then finally we pried it off with a couple of big screwdrivers, and we got it off. So then we did the big cleanup, and everything was pretty good at that point. It became pretty obvious to us that the leaking antifreeze came from the oil filter housing end. Now there was spray all over, so it wasn't for sure if that leak was actually caused from the hose bursting and spraying up, or if there was a leak coming out of the oil filter housing, because obviously you've got a coolant line that goes through it. So we weren't sure if there was a gasket issue there, because there was some obvious green, like antifreeze, right at the seam of that oil filter housing where there would be a gasket, so to speak. So we didn't know if we had an issue there on either the hose or the housing. But we proceeded to change. We cleaned everything up. We put the new hose on, the one that I kind of went out on a limb and bought anyway. So we cleaned everything up, put the new hose on. We topped up the antifreeze because at this point we lost a whole pile of antifreeze. It was pouring all over. When you start pulling that hose off, there's still a fair amount of antifreeze. It's at the high point of the engine, but there's still enough that drains out. So definitely had to have a drain pan below the car, and it all basically drained down there. So after we did that, we got everything snapped together, ran the car with the new hose in place, and after we topped the antifreeze up so that we had the float on the reservoir was back up, so we made sure everything was topped up. Then we ran it for a while with the rad cap off, and then let it cool, proceeded to do some other work, and then took the rad cap and screwed it back on, and then warmed the car up completely and went for a drive. And lo and behold, we're good. Now it appears as though we fixed the problem. It looks like it was just the upper rad hose. And again, it's a bit of a bearcat, that job, and I will advise you guys, be very, very careful if you're replacing that, not to twist the radiator end. Like I said before, you may risk breaking the neck off, and then you're going to be spending a whole lot of money. So we ended up fixing that up. I'm going to be driving the car for a while, watching for any additional oil or antifreeze leaks. But so far, after taking it for a good spin, it looks like we're out of the woods. Now, the big trick, guys. Next video, you're really going to want to come back, because this is the whole tuner BMW, the 335 here, that I'm working on modifying. While we were in there, we ended up digging in and doing some other modifications to the car. Now, you're going to have to wait to the next video to find that out. But in order to do that, make sure you subscribe to the channel as well. Hit the notifications bell. That will let you know when that next video is out, and you will know what I did for the next modification. It's an awesome mod, and I have to tell you, it is easily one of the best modifications I've seen on this car yet. I love the results. I love the transformation, and I have to say, catch you then. Bye-bye.